Good morning, handsome. I tried to be on time today. I tried to be on time today. What the hell? You called me? Good morning, handsome. I tried to be on time today. I tried to be on time today.
Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. This is Curt Doolittle with Martin and Francis from the Natural Law Institute. Today is Friday, April 12th, 2024, and these are our office hours. Office hours are when we take the questions that people have submitted to us during the previous, is it 2 weeks? 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I still get this wrong. You guys filter them somehow. And then I guess, Martin, you take a cut at them. Is that right?
Sure, but we haven't needed to filter out anything in a long time.
Is that true?
Yes.
No
Oh,
more profanities.
that's just fantastic. All right. So, and then Martin takes a cut at it, and basically, what we're really telling you is Francis and Martin do all the work. And, and Martin gives you the answer, and I try to add color and background to it. All right.
And I
So,
essentially anchor the answer, and then you're reacting to my answer.
yes. But the truth is, you're right. I mean, I was trying to say Martin's usually right. I'm just adding background to it. Um, Although I do like, everybody knows, I have a few things I tease Martin about that we supposedly disagree on. He's actually right. I just enjoy teasing him anyway. All right. So, where's the video of this? Okay, I gotta move this video here so I can see you guys too. There we go. All right. So, question. Usually, who reads the
Yeah,
Francis?
I'll read them. Yeah. Okay, question number one. What is your analysis of the Hungarian state model?
I'm not sure if I answered exactly that question, but anyway. To my knowledge, Orban altered the constitution to the extent that he's as much of a dictator as he can be while still having plausible deniability of Hungary being a liberal democracy. This has turned out to be to the population's benefit, as dictators are forced to deal with what their populations need and want due to being accountable, whereas liberal democracy is neither liberal nor democratic. Nobody in it is accountable and is as totalitarian as fascism and communism have ever been, except instead of censoring outright, uh, it channels political expressions in directions where they have no effect. Though, as we're seeing lately, they're not above using censorship when other tools are ineffective.
Uh, wow. I'm not sure. Martin, what you're saying, I think, Martin is quite critical of the state of liberal democracy. And mostly he's right. And I would be a little more qualified in my answer here and say uh, that there are things that each type of government is better at, and that the reason I advocate for monarchy under the classical liberal model is that monarchy is above the law in the restoration of the law, and that monarchies, as Hoppe demonstrated, act as owners, not renters. And so Martin is using the stronger version, which is the uh, dictator or fascist uh, model. I tend to stick with the mixed model, which is that if you have a monarchy that has self-interest, over centuries in preserving its position and preserving the independence of it, a monarchy can take care of those problems which dictators are needed to solve, and while still maintaining the economics of what liberal democracy is meant to solve. Unfortunately, in England, the constitution isn't strong enough. So, because Parliament is sovereign, not the natural law of the people, as such, while the monarchy actually has in the powers uh, to act as Martin is suggesting, they actually can't, because the Parliament is sovereign and can override it. This is unfortunate. I consider Martin's solution correct if you don't have a monarchy, or you don't have any set of aristocratic or noble families left that have that same interest over time. So obviously, it's easier for a country like England or Denmark or Sweden or Norway, or right. It's much easier if you have a long history of the monarchical tradition and a long history of the common law and a long history of Germanic uh, traditional legal rights and privileges. So, and so I'm not, I, my, so when we are asked this question, what do you think of your analysis of the Hungarian model? I would say what I usually say is that the government you need is the one you can have, given the population you have, in the condition you have, in the geographic and military circumstances you have. And so this is why you can have a France acting like France throughout history, because there's all of the Germanics, all of the Eastern Europeans before you get to the borderlands. Whereas when you're in England or Denmark or Norway or Sweden, you're basically on islands from the continent's perspective, and you have even more privileges than France has, but you don't have the agrarian advantage France has. If you're in Central or Eastern Europe, you have none of those advantages, and then so what happened was when the various revolutions happened in Europe, they happened in the West Coast, Italy. From basically, they happened in an axis from northern Italy to to uh, uh, Holland, right? That's the Lotharingian axis, which was the main imperial trade corridor. And then you got, because England had the experience it had, they invented basically the modernity, and that explosion moved eastward. And so, as it moved eastward, it had its general effects, which were mostly positive. Unfortunately, the world wars interrupted those. Excuse me, Napoleon first and the World War second interrupted that process, or Europe would have been relatively homogenous, and the Russians would never have been able to be captured by the Marxists, and we would not have this capture of liberal democracy by, or, which is classical liberalism, um, being
That was
captured by the
democracy.
West. Sorry?
Classical liberalism wasn't a democracy.
You're correct. I'm sorry. So what you mean is you mean what's the term you use here? Liberal democracy. I see. I didn't.
That's not a liberal or democratic system.
Yeah, I'm
That's
sorry. I didn't catch it, Martin. I didn't catch it. It's because I'm so hooked in my own classical liberalism that I misunderstood your terms. Yes, you were correct. Classical liberalism is not liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is the extension of the franchise to all in the French model, whereas classical liberalism retains the demand for responsibility by class.
it's important that it extends the franchise and that channels it in a way that it doesn't affect anything.
It's useless. It's just government by lying. All right, yeah. So
That's the same thing.
I told you I love you lately.
Yes.
All right. Oh God, that was a. I didn't expect. I saw the answer. What is your analysis of Hungarian state? But I didn't expect to get such a good content out of that one. But that was actually pretty good. Thank you.
What made the English Constitution differ from the American Constitution such that in the English Constitution the people are not sovereign, whereas the Parliament was? Is it the I mean protection, the Second Amendment, protection of guns, and, or
It's that there's two basic things. Um, I think it's two, might be three. First, that um, the English Constitution was developed while there was awareness of constant natural law. The American Constitution is specifically from Blackstone is a document of natural law. So there is a base law to human existence that nobody can violate. That's number one. The second thing is that they there was still some aspect of church and state in England, and this was they were very powerful, as well as an underclass. So they had the three. We do the ternary logic, right? So you still had the underclass, you had the church, and you had the state, and so you had three corrupt groups when there was a emerging middle class of both farmers and business people. And so they were trying to say none of that shit, no more corruption. And so they built so when they built this, they built it with natural law. Um, they built it with the Constitution, and they made this group of people. Martin's gonna like where I go with this. They made this group of people sovereign, but what they meant by the people was very similar to what the British meant by the people, which is very similar to what the Romans meant by the people, which is identical to what the Greeks meant by the people, which is those of us with demonstrated capacity for responsibility for the private and common, which means in that case, you run a business, whether it's a farm or something else. You're running a business, or when and they considered quite rationally running a state or a government as a business, and so it was limited to the responsible people. But because we had this long history of the church and the Germanic tradition and the Roman tradition and the Greek tradition, is that the aristocracy is responsible for people. You can't just abuse them. Even in this, you could do worse to slaves in the in the in the age of sail which was chattel slavery, than you could to slaves in the Greek, Roman, Germanic, um, and continental and American eras. You just can't, you couldn't treat people like that. Um, because they're your charges, and the church to some degree took over the charge of the slaves, which is the peasants, the serfs, whatever, from the aristocracy. But the church was captured by the aristocracy. So the aristocracy was populated, used second sons, so to speak, to populate the church, and then the church to administer the people by administering the land. So um, there's a this tradition of caring for the little people maintained in Europe that was not like, say, the Mesoamericans or um, who the
Middle
the,
East.
the yeah, I'm thinking of, well, I'm just trying to think, well, I can't think of the Assyrians who are they're down there with the, oh my God, they were really like that, and they make the Mesoamericans look tame. so so um anyway, so have I answered your question now? What
It,
was
it relates to what we've said before. Uh, when you enfranchise everyone, at least on paper, then you have to start propagandizing them so they vote for what
Yeah,
you want.
exactly.
Whereas when you don't do such pretensions and don't give them illusions of political power, you can just leave them alone.
um but people do have or via negativa rights still, right? They can still go to court if they're
Sure.
right, but they don't have via positiva right. They have the right of defense, but they don't have the right of offense. Right? So I usually blame the failure of the Western model on the introduction of women more than anything else, and the second Jewish sedition against the West as its amplifier. I don't usually blame our downfall so much on the enfranchisement of the working classes, in other words, people who pay taxes. And I'm wondering if and I'm saying that simply because uh, the we didn't seem to have too much of that problem in America um, until Marxism came about. And so, is it really necessary that the underclass can't, not the underclass, excuse me, that's the wrong term, that that everybody can't vote, or is it that women can't vote, or is it that women can't vote and Jews and their white copiers, so to speak, can't sell their propaganda?
In the first place, you can have groups with clearly competing interests voting, because then you're turning it into proxy for war.
Right. So you have the goal as the Greeks and Romans said is you're trying to build a middle class because the middle class is the only one that has the interests of everybody at heart, and the aristocracy is always small. And as long as you're enfranchising the business owners, you have. I think that so. Okay, so I'm going to, for the sake of argument, I'm going to agree with you. I don't see the why people who have no demonstrated capacity for what we would call political and economic responsibility, meaning they haven't demonstrated competency, should participate in matters of state. However, they need to have their rights protected so that harm can't be done to them by the state. Is that
Well,
is that
I think that's one of the questions when I talk to my wife about this. This is one of the questions that she always have is If women can't vote, then who's there to protect women's rights, right? Who's there to say that thou shalt not beat your wife and so on and so forth?
Well, man, what does she think men want to do to women?
She
All right.
she's a woman, so she always have this tendency to go neck salt, right?
Yeah,
Rather
but
than looking at
We,
the
we,
distribution
we,
curve.
we
so
literally give animals rights. Do you think we're just gonna take away the rights from women?
I think that the one of the problems missing from the law, which we've addressed in the law, now our group has addressed, at least Martin and I have addressed it, is that you need to have there this idea that everybody has the same rights, that, is only so far as that we're not talking about sexes, right? Women do need certain rights and for defenses, and men need certain rights and defenses from women, etc. And I think we could enumerate those, get rid of this problem. But I mean, fundamentally, once you have basic human rights that excuse me, I shouldn't, basic natural rights, I'm sorry, I made a mistake there. Basic natural rights, obligations, and alienations, which again, we've written out as not just rights, but rights, obligations, and alienations. We've composed it that way. Once you have it, if you want that, we have the ability to make a class, right, which is a class action, is an innovation that's been necessary in the law for a long time. The Americans produced it, and we should be able to groups should be able to use that to prevent violations of their rights. I agree. I would agree with that. The conflict becomes over the one thing that's just very difficult to deal with, because of the sexes, and that's due to abortion, because the fundamental right is the right to self-determination by self-determined means. The natural law answer is, if you took the action to create the momentum which brings a body into life, then you have borne responsibility now for that individual who is yet to be, and that individual yet to be is the responsibility not only of you but of everybody else, because that individual has the right to self-determination by self-determined means. So, we this is this side of, in this case, in this level of depth, you would say, well, the law is very clear that abortion is not okay. The certainly prophylactic, what do you call it? Protection, reproductive protection is, but abortion isn't. Yet the same, we could flip that around and say, okay, what are there no exceptions to self-determination by self-determined means and whatever? And if you were to say, well, we make the choice to kill people on a regular basis. We kill people in self-defense. We kill people as with capital punishment. We kill people in war, and increasingly we kill people in what do you call it? Euthanasia, or in euthanasia. And not all of those are up to self-determined by self-determined means. And so, is this question of abortion one of natural law, which is infinitely decidable, or is it one of political choice in the interest of the people? Um, uh, I've generally stated that this is the only really hard problem in political thought, uh, and so, if given that this is the only hard problem, the moral problem to solve, I would say abortions aren't legal. In other words, aren't legal, moral, ethical, or within the natural law. However, I would say that there are decisions political groups make, such as capital punishment, that are necessary to make for regardless because of the consequences of it. And you could flip that around and say abortion has turned out to be one of the reasons why, with which our population is collapsing sufficiently, that the social, economic, and political models we've built, like especially the intergenerational transfer of caretaking, is no longer possible, or very shortly no longer possible. So these are hard questions. Basically, if to fix England, the UK, you would have to go back and say the Parliament isn't sovereign. They would need to write the Constitution down, state that it was a constitution of natural law, capture the foundations of natural law as we have, and make the people sovereign. And so the people would have a means for protecting themselves within this natural law, and of course, this would allow immigration to stop. Anyway, uh, I hope I went on too long there. Sorry.
One,
Yeah,
I have something to add on to that. So, but in this case, in this situation, by sovereignty, do you just can we think of it as defined as self-determination by self-determined means, or is there a more elaborate and scientific definition?
That no, it's it's the the elimination of conflict by the reciprocal assurance of self-determined by self-determined means. Right, right. Self-determination by so it starts with self-determination by self-determined means. How do you do that? By by measurements, sovereignty and demonstrated interests, limiting us to reciprocity and display word and deed. So it is self-determination. That's natural law. How do you do that under natural law? Sovereignty and demonstrated interest, reciprocity in display word and deed, and duty in the enforcement of both. How many reciprocity duty? I'm watching your face. Make sure I made that point clear. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to add to Francis's last question that women are far more likely to vote away women's rights than men are.
It's true.
Wait, how?
The problem is
To undermine,
female
nobody
responsibility.
hates women more than other women.
That's true.
Oh yeah, that's right.
All right.
All right, shall we move on to question two? All right, so question two from Shade. Context. Curt has mentioned being a student in Friedrich Hayek and the Mises Institute. I recently read Hayek coined the term scientism, which refers to when methods adopted from physical science are twisted and stretched beyond their areas of applicability. Question: does Hayek's scientism simply refers to problems such as mathiness and other theories that attempt to reduce complex behaviors to simple questions without preserving necessary information, i.e., fitting? Otherwise, how does the goal of Natural Law Institute to create commensurability of the sciences refute or elaborate upon Hayek's claim about scientism being a faulty approach to govern society? Would Curt and Hayek have an argument about this method?
No, we wouldn't have. Pike and I wouldn't argue about anything. I would largely say to him that I'm basically bearing the benefit of coming after him, being after him, and experiencing all the technological advantage that has come, particularly from the computer science revolution, but also the vast difference in knowledge we have about the demonstrated performance of economies over longer periods of time, and all the record keeping we have in law, the cognitive advances in cognitive science, the advances in genetics, um, and somewhat the advances in mathematics. What he's really talking about here is the use of the claim of science for to insert fear, uncertainty, and doubt when there is none. In the case where um, answers are self-evident, and the failure of the data to be collected is being used to deny the self-evident. On one hand, I hope I didn't forget the second part of it. So so that's the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and on one hand, and the pretense of knowledge on the other, where the science says what says something and they're using just this little piece of this argument to make deductive claims when other knowledge is in conflict with it. So think of it as so so mathiness is the best example, but realistically, uh, this is an argument about the philosophy of science. In other words, scientific decidability, and when does it apply and when doesn't apply. And so Hayek's absolutely correct. How does so? I want to make sure I answer the question here. Um, no, it's just it really means it really means what it says. What Hayek says is you're trying to get away with a pretense of knowledge. That's what scientism means. It's just the opposite. It's just like theology. Arguing theologically is you're trying to get away with a pretense of knowledge you don't possess. And so, you can do this with science in the positive, claiming you know stuff that you don't, yet what you're really doing is denying the obvious. And secondly, claiming knowledge that you have by claiming that something is true. Something is true. Let's see. Something is true despite the obvious, or something is false because you have no scientific evidence of it. I mean, it's it's just another kind of it's a kind of basically it's a technically it's a sophistry. Um, in other words, a sophistry because it's a play on logic, but it's just a sophistry. And this you got to understand that this debate was very profound in economics. And today we look back at this time period, which is the time period of the uh, first, the end of the 19th century, especially to the war eras, um, is and suddenly afterwards. This is really an, a counter argument against by, back and forth between the false scientific claims of the Marxists and the criticisms of science by the theological and philosophical. And this is, and it's one of the examples of why philosophy ended. And the argument is the less Darwin was the less philosopher because there's no philosophy left. That isn't really true. But philosophy died in the 20th century because science had replaced, had demarcated it, so that truth was a matter of the science, and I'll explain that in a minute. And but science doesn't self preference or choice or good. Philosophy is still necessary for the decision of what's preferable and good. You still need systems of deciding among preferences. The difference is that philosophies need to therefore adapt and change, where sciences only need to grow, increasing in precision. Now, I think that one of the problems I've tried to discuss is that science, the purpose of science is to discover first principles. In other words, what's the underlying logic of the universe? How does it operate? What are those basic fundamental laws? And now I use the term first principle because laws have a very specific meaning in science. And so I use the term first principles, which is more accurate in talking about the emergence of different basic law equivalent of laws as complexity increases and new domains of potential emerge. But to get back to the simple context of it, um, the science is the process by which we recursively, incrementally, and recursively identify what are the first principles in pursuit of the, the first logic of the universe. In my opinion, we're just about there. There's either we're going to be able to alter the condition of the quantum background somehow and manipulate it as we do the material universe, right? Because there's the material universe, which is protoparticles, particles, and atoms and molecules, etc. And then there's the quantum background, which we're not quite sure what it consists of. We only know how it behaves. My understanding is that it's probably homogeneous and it's a single thing, It's a homogeneous single thing, and it's in different states, just like all the material world is a single homogeneous thing in different states. But assuming that, right now, assuming I'm just using this as a thought experience, that there is no way to alter the condition of the quantum background, meaning there's no faster than light travel, there's no faster than light communication, there's no uh, um, ability to, basically that would be two. That's the material and informational transfer. Um, Assuming those things are true, then we know the first principles of the universe from the bottom up, and we can explain everything. So that means there's a constructive logic of reality, and that's what science is sought to produce. And then then science, once it understands the first principles, now it only needs to learn what are the application of those principles at all scales of complexity, and we'll just keep discovering those things probably for freaking ever. So if I've been successful here, the point is scientism is a correct criticism of the misapplication of science to either deny or pretense of knowledge of denial, or pretense of knowledge of real knowledge, um, in order to in order to in order to basically cause a deception by a sophistry. And the two courses that are behind this are primarily, it's somewhat in philosophy, but certainly in theology and in leftist Marxism. Those are strong cases. The third question here is how does the goal of the Natural Institute to create commensurability science refute, or it doesn't. There's there's no conflict between Hayek's and what I'm saying and how to govern. I mean, we call what we do scientific perfect government as a joke, but it's scientific government uh, under the natural law. And no, Hayek and I wouldn't disagree about anything. I can't imagine when I read Hayek, it sounds like me talking to myself. So I doubt that would be the case. As always, thank you for your work. Well, thank you from Shade for the thanks.
Yeah,
Of course, it has developed into religion proper. Experts mean priests.
Yeah.
Consensus means dogma that cannot be questioned.
Yes. Oh, wait a minute. You're saying there's another one. Say that again. Dogma.
No, it's what that has developed into.
I see. I got it.
yeah.
Thank you.
The fact that science has developed into a religion that you cannot question versus science is merely a tool to falsify. Right.
Yeah.
The way I kind of look at it is when well, there are two problems with this scientism. Well, one is applications of tools in one that's applicable to one domain and falsely apply it to another domain. Like for example, using math to calculate how to be happy. Like
Yeah.
as absurd as that sounds, but that's a form of scientism.
Right.
And the other
We
one is like, well, maybe you can use math to say falsify certain things. To one plus one does not equal to prove that one plus one is indeed two, but not three. But if you apply in a positive sense rather than using it as a way to eliminate the obvious bad choices, that's where things tend to go wrong.
Yes. I mean, the whole thing about scientific knowledge is um, the human tendency is to want to know, to be able to get the farthest with the knowledge they have, despite the fact that the way you actually learn to work with knowledge is that you're trying to falsify. You're trying to say, of all the stupid things I can think of, which of them are are likely wrong, right? You're trying to find out that, and I just think it's a burden on people to try to think scientifically. I mean, put it this way. See, the reason the West came up with science, empiricism, and science is it's just an extension of our law. Well, why do we have the law we have? It's because uh, I'm going to do this to Edgar Martin, because no right of authority in the West. I'm saying that on purpose. Uh, in other words, there's no person who's able to say it must be this way. In other words, so there's always this matter of judicial dispute. And so, when with that taken, we basically, what does science mean? It means the collection of evidence and the testimony to support it. And so, what is science? It's the a use of measurement and evidence to produce that which we can testify to, and eliminate that which we cannot testify to. And that's all it is. It's a very simple process of epistemic process. And what people don't understand, the piece I'm working on right now, is that what is Anglo rule of law? It's why is Anglo government the invention of the modern state? And it's because these things are purely empirical. It's just science applied to law and government. And it turns out that's really effective if you can keep the people honest enough to testify. Uh,
Well, the one thing I want to add to this, maybe the first thing before using any kind of scientific method to try to solve a problem is try to falsify whether this method is even applicable to this domain.
Say that again.
I guess I didn't say it very well. So that before you decide to use a certain scientific method to try to solve a problem in a certain domain, the first thing you got to try to falsify is whether this method can be applied in that domain, whether this is the right tool to solve the problem.
Correct. Exactly. No, it's not that you didn't explain it the right the first time. It's that I was not done thinking about something, and so I didn't hear it until the end. All right.
All right, let's move on. Okay, next question is from me. Please deliberate. The Redmond City Council has unilaterally decided, without voting from the citizenry, to transfer a plot of land in a downtown area to Plymouth Housing, a private developer of affordable housing, for development of a permanent supportive housing project. Once completed, this project will house homeless and drug addicts. What duties have the City Council neglected, and what natural laws have they violated? And how would one construct a common law suit represent a citizen to one, stop their actions, and two, exact restitution?
You put a class action suit together against the state, for the government, and you specifically charge the people who've attempted to do this with the crime of conspiracy to harm the capital of the city, the population, because there's no good that comes of these things, right? You don't bring bad people to good areas where they're concentrated. You take you take bad people and spread them out across large areas where they're not concentrated. So this
Yeah, I
legal
have a
I would love to have. Oh, Martin, I'm sorry, Martin. I didn't realize you'd answered this, or I wouldn't have started. Go ahead.
just partially, we're going to be saying the same thing. Where reciprocity is concerned, the problem is obvious. It's an imposition on all the affected locals. It's an involuntary exchange, a negative externality that we expect not to be restituted. Unless obviously they're supporting lifestyles of these people instead of suppressing them, locking them up, or moving them somewhere far away.
Mm-hmm. This is a terrible idea for Redmond. Terrible, 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 terrible idea. I don't know. I would put together a class action suit tomorrow. Matter of fact, if I lived there, I'd drive it.
Yeah, I just FYI, I asked this question after the fact. I actually went to city council in their like public hearing or something, and essentially, I I stated to them that they're violating natural law of reciprocity. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how many of them even understood what I talked about. Probably not
Mm-hmm.
many. But they violate, in my opinion, they violate at least four out of the five rules of reciprocity. The problem is, I mean, the law of reciprocity is part of common law, but it's not really documented anywhere. It's not something that I can I can say, well, you clearly violate this law, and this is your
Oh, it's tort. No, it's the basis of the common law. It's tort, or I mean, it's trespass. They're imposing trespass on
mhm,
citizens, right? I mean, I mean, we use the word reciprocity because we're trying to take a word, we're trying to make a scientific term that's universally applicable. Whereas if I say tort, I'm taking a thing from a context called law, right? So I just tort means trespass. Trespass is the basis of all crime. There's no crime that is not consist of trespass. So the what the state is doing is imposing a trespass on the residents. Now, there's probably reasons for it. One is that it will shift the voting block, right? Because if you add malcontents to a population, you generate demand for
mhm,
authority, and therefore the government wants power so it can close it. The second thing is that they will probably get state subsidies for having done so, and of course there's no end of hunger, even in a jurisdiction like Redmond, which doesn't need money. you know? I mean, if they could build the city hall they've built, and they can
they
build
are
the
squandering money left and
it's
right.
ordering money left and right. So, and I haven't been there, but I used to know these people, and they made me laugh. They were so childish. Um, so, but then after that, excuse me, then so there's the state funding issue, and then there's the status issue, right? There's a tendency of people in Seattle to look to San Francisco,
Mhm,
and there's a tendency of the people in the outlying cities to look to Seattle.
mhm.
And
Add
so
influence.
basically the disease, um, I the, what do you call it when cancer spreads? It's
Metastasize.
metastasizes. So the disease metastasizes across the regions for that reason. I think I cried about But part of the reason I'd like to move back is so I could get involved in this crap.
This is definitely on my list as far as lawfare goes.
Mhm.
Well, you mentioned something about rather than concentrating the bad in one place, you want to actually spread it out. But wouldn't that just, to borrow the word, wouldn't that just metastasize the problem everywhere? Or are you hoping that by spreading out the bad, the good surrounding it can actually somehow mitigate it?
You do. You just what happens. Uh, you know, it small town, small town police can handle a small number of
Hmm.
these people, and they
Oh,
can
true.
actually get care, but they can't concentrate into a political force, and the people in the areas will never tolerate them doing so. So it's just a ratio problem,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to have them collect in large numbers. They advance they pose a burden on the people. The state. I mean, this is like the problem in California. I can't remember who said this. Retired sheriff of Los Angeles County, I think, and he said, "Look, the problem is in California. This whole caring for malcontents has turned into an industry. People profit from it. They have jobs, right? So it's become an industry to be in to bring in malcontents
Hmm.
and defective people and broken people, and concentrate them there, and then it's killing cities, right? I mean, look what's happened just to San Francisco already. I mean, I remember thinking, I mean, when I was younger, it was like a wacky place, right? Right? San Francisco was a weird place originally, right? It's like the hippie
But it
thing.
wasn't so bad that,
Wait, I'm going to go through my. Then it became. Then what happened was the technology moved from Boston to California, right? And the second thing that happened is, which we know in Taiwan Semiconductor, is that the Texas Instruments uh, let the development of advanced chips go to Taiwan with one of their people, right? And so we ended up with all this wealth concentrated in the area. And of course, San Francisco at the time was a really nice place to live. It really
Yeah.
was. I mean, it was settled by Anglos, so I mean, it's like New England was on the West Coast, and so it was a very nice place. And then the left got in control, and they turned it into a shithole.
San
So
Francisco from the end, I don't know about the before the end of the Second World War, but there was a reason why UN chose San Francisco to host their charter conference or whatever in the mid of the 1940s. I mean, it was as close to paradise as you
yeah, it was
can get.
gorgeous.
And even up all the way up to the 90s, it was a pretty good place to live.
Absolutely. I mean, I tell people, look, when did you move to Seattle?
The early 2000s. So
Early
I'm
two
less
thousand.
familiar with the San Francisco after the 2000s.
So I say this repeatedly. Living in Seattle in the 90s was probably one of the best places to live in human history. We had the phenomenal amount of money coming in from Microsoft. It gave its We had a high density of engineers because we had basically Boeing and Microsoft as our only industries.
Mm.
So like you could be in, I mean, I remember going to Marymore Park and saying, this is the only place in the world other than Harvard Square where I'm a fellow nerd in a majority of fellow nerds. It was the most glorious feeling. And it's really true. And and then we had all this economic explosion because the 90s were where communism had folded. China was bringing up prices, were coming down. We felt like we had won the Cold War. It was a very elated period, and so the arts in Seattle were phenomenal. And of course, my wife was involved in the arts, so we had arts involved in Seattle. We had all sorts of experimental businesses. I don't know if you know about that restaurant that had the games you could go play. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was
Mm.
it was like they have today. They have these puzzle rooms of some sort, all right?
Oh
But
yeah, the escape rooms. Yeah.
we had there was a whole building down there in the south end, the north end of Seattle that had all that stuff back then, and it wasn't one; it was like lots of them, and there were all sorts of fascinating things. So it was an incredible time, and I was I was building a technology business at the time. I swear to God, it was like going to Microsoft with a fucking laundry basket and just catching money. And you didn't even have to try. It was like, what problem you got? I can fix that. It was just like catching money in baskets. And so, it was a great, and there was, we didn't, and back then, Seattle and Portland were the two cities that didn't have race problems because there had been no migration because the two cities had preserved their anti-racial, their racial identity policies for the longest time. And so we didn't have any of these race problems. We always had the people, um, where's the bridge at the north end? You
520,
what?
520, or are you talking 90?
The what's the run along the river there? They're along the sound there.
Oh, you
And
mean the 99 Aurora?
so right down there, and then there was that area under the bridge, and then there's
Right.
that goofy. That area was always whatever, right? But it was pretty much there. But when you went into what's the next thing where you cross the water and you go into that next group? What is that? Belltown? Is it Belltown?
Mm-hmm.
Belltown. It was just freaking hippies.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
It was used furniture stores and hippies selling shit, and it was glorious, a glorious time and place to live. And they ruined it. They absolutely ruined it. And
It,
they did it.
I guess Belltown is still kind of hippie-ish, except
Oh yeah,
it's now hippies that has to worth at least a million or two,
yeah,
to be
exactly.
able to live there, which no
I mean,
no no right hippies actually can.
you could get an apartment on Queen Anne for $700,
Yeah,
right?
those
I
were the
mean,
times.
those were right. I mean, if you were making in the early '90s, or any of the night, if you were making anywhere close to 100, the '70s, '80s, '90s, I mean, you could live great. I mean, my wife didn't work. My wife stayed home and did art jewelry.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was one of the best places. I mean, you go to that, you go to Paris in the '20s, you go to Manhattan in the aughts, right? You go to people disagree with me on this, but Berlin in the 30s was probably one of the better places to be. There's all these great periods.
Before the Weimar Republic or after the Nazi came to power and cleaned it all up?
Well, I don't, I can't, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I just know that, say, social life in Berlin went through an extraordinary period before the war broke out.
Mm.
Paris in the 20s, it was great after the war, right? I mean, Paris in the 20s was great after the war. So there was some great, I mean, fundamentally, the 90s for us was after the Cold War, right? So you have these wonderful periods um, that are good, and then you have these horrible periods like from 65 to 79, 77, 79. That was just fucking shit. It was just awful. And what I think is funny is all the boomers who talk about music and the music as their saving grace of the period. And I'm like, dude, Vietnam, left, the Democrats and the left getting together. There was bombings every freaking weeks around the country, right? It was, I mean, nobody talks. There were bombings all the time. I mean, it was all the time. There were airplanes being hijacked um, and terrorist groups here in the United States, and it was insane. And then we had the terrible job of getting out of Vietnam, and then we had the oil crisis, which was unbelievably. That was just really bad. And then we had the stagflation, right? The destroyed the economy, and nothing until about. I mean, 50% of college kids couldn't find jobs. College graduates couldn't find jobs, and so they talk about this like it was some great. No, they talk about the music because it's the only thing that wasn't shit. And even then, you had the disco thing come about. It turned music to shit for a decade. So I don't know. I mean, I don't get that at all. But I mean, if I ask any of my neighbors who are all older people, they'll say, "Oh, it was the '50s the best time to be alive?" And I'm like, "Well, of course, right? With economic prosperity, which is you could quit a job today and find another one tomorrow, right?" And so, and then for America, it was pretty good in the '80s, but it was holy shit in the '90s.
Yeah,
Um,
the roaring 90s.
it was amazing. And though, I built my companies in the '80s, in the '90s, and in the early 2000s, and in the 2000s, first 20 aughts. It was way freaking harder to build a company from 2001 to 2010 than it was and it's way harder to build a company now than it was then. Whereas in the '90s, I was making money with technology from around 1980 to around 2000. It was hunting fish in a barrel. Anyway,
Well, Levi says you had grunge, yes, and then Kurt likes Nirvana and Led Zeppelin.
no, Nirvana, Led Zeppelin, Nirvana, the post grunge movement, which is like Breaking Benjamin, and then Tool and Perfect Circle. I mean, what are you going to do? That's like perfection. I could sort of add a little Russian tull in there and maybe like round it out a bit. But I mean, if you look at musical composition, it's pretty hard to beat Zeppelin. I mean, and Tool is at the other end. I mean, that stuff is magic. Anyway, but yeah, no, I was really sad when Cobain killed himself. I remember it vividly. I was in my living room. The television was on. I sat down on the floor and I said, "I can't believe you took yourself
Wait,
from
when
us."
when did that happen?
92, I think.
Wow, that's way early, way earlier than I thought.
Yeah, there was 92. I remember it. It was a sunny. I remember the sun because we don't get that many sunny.
Hmm.
And I was sitting in the living room was the front of the house because I was living up on the plateau. What today is Sammamish, right? It was
Hmm.
then it was Redmond. Today it's Sammamish, or it was King County Redmond, but we call it Redmond, but it's Sammamish. And I was living up on top of the plateau, looking down the mountain to the east. So I'm just sitting there and I'm, I can't believe you killed yourself, you son of a bitch, because as fucked up as he was doing great stuff, and the whole vibe in Seattle at the time, it was the most positive experience ever. Anyway, let's go.
All right. Well, next question is also for me. So in this tweet, you mentioned the world's capital structure going through trauma not seen before, and all of us that predicted a major shift around 2030 were right. What do you foresee? What do you foresee the outcome of the shift in capital structure, and how would you position yourself investing and benefit from the structural shift? And that's this tweet right here. I don't know if you can see it.
Where
Well,
you
it's
want
in
me to
the
pull up this tweet? Oh, I see. You've got a link here, and I
yeah.
can pull up my tweet. So copy. Whoops. So highlight, copy, put in Chrome, pasta, and go. And I think I remember this tweet, believe it or not. Uh, no, I got okay. I'm sure it's going to continue going forward. Yeah. So I say this in the thing too. I on I could model the future very accurately uh, through most of the uh, till about 214, 215, and I could do it because I made sure I was really enmeshed in the information going on. And consulting companies are really good at that because you get insight into all these sources,
Mhm.
right? If you're a consulting company, you have your customers of the Fortune 400. You can see into these companies and their thoughts. So you have this incredible information stream. And if you know enough about economics, you can look at this. And my thing is really the long term. So I look at monetary, where monetary policy is and where I think the economy is going to go. So I looked at this and I'm like, well, this is I could see the future for a while, but I can't see beyond whatever the crisis is. And I knew the crisis was an intersection of various cycles, and that was going to be this catastrophic. But I sort of came. I ended up with saying I don't see a model, but what models do others see? And I saw Huntington being the correct model, which is that we would return to the conflict of civilizations, because the Western capacity, in other words, our advantage, would be ameliorated by the equilibration of science, technology, and populations. And so I just couldn't see how we could maintain this current order. And at the time, I was still in the optimistic frame of mind that the remaining imperialists, which were Russia, China, Iran, South Korea, what?
And America.
Sorry.
And America.
Well, that's another one of our disputes. Um, uh, um, is at the time I saw that I thought that they would eventually have to integrate into the world model system, in other words, into the federated system.
Empire.
It's not an empire. Uh, it may have imperial ambitions, but the empire is not to extract; it is to prevent another world war by preventing the another rise of empires. Anyway, we're returning to the conflict of civilizations, because the advantage between civilizations has been ameliorated, equilibrated. So I that's what I saw. So when you ask me what's beyond it, I can't really see anything other than looking at technology forward and economy and world economies backward. And in world economies, I mean trade will continue will reverse from being universal and cheap to being civilization based and expensive. And so our costs are going to go up. The second thing is the asymmetric view of reproduction and how we're going to handle it. Because Africa is going to starve when that happens, and their population is going to seek to flood those places that are not. I think that's the next terrifying bit after that. So we're more likely to have a world war. We're more likely to have this asymmetric problem, and we're more likely to be poorer, all things considered. However, all things considered has to take into account the that if this innovation AI is successful, and it is much earlier than any of us predicted. I was saying 2050, right? But this technique of brute forcing AI from language was an innovation.
Hmm.
And if that continues, and it looks like, I mean, we've got almost infinite attention from one of the groups now. So it's going to take a while for this to play out, but it's not taking too long. When this plays out, I mean, a lot of those jobs we created that were white collar because of the computer revolution, they're going to go away, right? And the so we're and the we're repatriating industry, so some blue collar jobs are going to come back. But what are we going to do with the blue collar jobs are going to be those that still require quite a bit of skill. And so, what are we going to do with a very large population that we no longer have use for, right? In a world where things are much more expensive, in a world where humans have less value. And I, I, I can say, here's how I would solve that problem. And I think solving that problem early would be possible if we didn't have, as Martin said, a what do you call it, liberal democratic? Is that what the term you used? Liberal democracies, a world of liberal democracies. But we had a world that had leadership strong enough to force a change that would in a that before it was a reaction. Um, I think we could probably solve this problem. Otherwise, I don't think there is a safe haven. I don't see a safe haven anywhere. The real estate's been a safe haven because of growth, and but my view is that in order to fix reproduction, they're going to have to end the viability of real estate as a durable investment.
Yeah, I kind of look at it from the perspective once baby boomers starts to die off, then what are you going to do with their $1 million mansions? They're going to have to come down in price. I mean, I'm on this Facebook group where from time to time they would just post Japanese houses for sale, like perfectly good 100-year houses with tatami and everything, going for like $20,000. Of course,
Yeah,
not in the smack in the middle of Tokyo, right? But like in countryside, which I could totally see the place I could live, and that's
yeah,
because their older people died off.
yep, yep. Well, but I was looking at somebody asked me to take a look at a the housing prices in a remote part of Montana yesterday.
Hmm.
They were like $1 million.
Wait, wait, wait. How remote? Is it close to Chris? What's his name? Ted Krasinski's cabin?
Oh no, no, no,
'Cause I have a friend who almost bought that cabin.
are you serious?
Yes,
I I would do that
Lincoln,
just to talk smack
Lincoln,
about it.
Montana.
I would have done that just to talk smack about it forever.
Yeah, right.
Like buying a strip club. It just gives you did what, and now you've got you can entertain you can entertain a dinner party for an evening by being ridiculous. Anyway, um, no, and so the houses are like, and I'm like, these are not $1 million houses, right? And so you just wonder how is this happening? I mean, it, why is a house in rural Maine expensive? I mean, where is this coming from? That makes no sense if you look at it as multiples of people's income. I mean, when I was growing up, my mother was say, you need to have your house can only cost you this much of your total income. And I'm like, okay. Well, who can do that today?
I tried, but the property tax is just going
Through the roof, right?
haywire, right? I was
And
explaining to my
you're not.
daughter. I was explaining to my daughter the other day, and we bought this home 10 years ago, and the house. Well, I mean, I haven't done any improvement to it, so the house technically is actually condition of the house has actually gone worse, and yeah, the amount of property tax I pay for it basically tripled.
Yes.
It's just if you ask Redmond City Council where the money's come from, they're fleecing it off of us.
My house was across from Red West, right? Red West.
Hmm.
210,000 for it.
Damn, that's cheap.
Right. And no, but that was back then.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Right? Today, I don't know what it's worth. It's well over a million,
Hmm.
which is insane. It's insane. Anyway, all right. So, what's going to happen? There's no. I don't believe there is a safe zone. I don't think. I don't know of any. What do you do? I think if your house is paid off, your house is paid off. That's the smartest thing you can do. Right?
Well, I'm actually thinking the reverse. If
Go Oh,
so,
I
the
see.
governments have problems with debt.
Yes.
Um, Instead of raising taxes, which will just throw people up in arms, one thing that
Yep.
they can do is inflate it away. And inflation is debt forgiveness.
Yes. And so it doesn't make sense to pay it off if
Right. As
you're
long
gonna.
as we had a fixed rate for long periods of time,
Yes, that's
which
right.
you can do in the US.
Yes.
But I mean, I saw that coming. I didn't see the property tax thing coming.
Well, I don't know where. I don't want to ask where you are online because I don't know exactly where you are. But
Well,
sorry.
you'll find out in a couple of months.
Okay, so I lived right across from Red West, right
Hmm.
on 148th, and then I had my place out in Fall City. But I also had a place over. I can't remember the street now, Northeast 33rd or place or something like that, which is overlooking Sammamish. Is it Sammamish? Lake Sammamish, right? So it's over that's so as you're coming down Belred Road, instead of turning left into Microsoft, you turn right
Hmm.
down there, and you go into those developments down there. I had a place.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Right?
Hmm.
That house was when I first lived in it was $40,000.
$40,000 won't even get you. Well, of course, it won't even get you an apartment out there. You probably
Yeah,
won't
it's
buy
insane.
you. It probably won't buy you even a small plot of land.
So um, it's gone crazy. But so I've lived in and I've lived on the in Fall City on the plateau, in Bellevue, and in Redmond. Plus, I've had a condo overlooking. I can't remember what the name of the park there is in downtown Bellevue. So I had a condo in Bellevue. So I've lived all around there, but I've had the number. I was shocked at the number of office buildings I've had. I went and did that a couple of I don't know last year, try to plan all the office property that I've rented or owned or something at one point in time around Bellevue. I was horrified how many companies right I've had in there, and today I mean just the rent,
Hmm.
just the rent in those buildings is unbelievable. So all right, anyway, what's the next thing?
Question number 5 from Evan. Broadly across the West, we seem to be running out of reliable sources of base load power with the phase out of coal and distaste toward nuclear. Simultaneously, power demand is rapidly rising from a broad electrification and data center compute. How do we solve this problem?
Since this question presumes we are at a point where we have the power to make such decisions, we shut down the anti-nuclear propaganda and get right back to it.
Well, the real answer is we produce shale, and we're the largest oil producer in the world now. but the byproduct of shale is a waste
Natural
product
gas.
called natural gas. It's going to be a long time before we run out of natural gas, and it's basically free. It's a
Mhm.
waste product. The only problem is transporting it versus
I think
transporting
actually
it.
what they need to do is build power stations in North Nebraska or in North Dakota, where it is, where they're burning off that gas, and just
Yes,
turn it into electricity.
yes. And so the real problem becomes transmission distance. Um, so, uh, so there's not a problem there. I I can't imagine the world is not going to go back to nuclear power. I mean, we would need in the United States something on the order of 300 nuclear power plants, right? That I, from my, I mean, I haven't done the calculations since last year, but it's something we would need basically 300 nuclear power plants, and it's the best. There's no comparison with how little pollution and how much power they generate. It's more expensive. It's a lot more expensive, but eventually you do run out of fossil fossil fuels. And the real answer is that fossil fuels have more those long chains, right? The hydrocarbons, they have a lot of uses that are really good. So burning them for energy is actually not very smart. So preserving those fossil fuels for other uses is, in other words, those preserving hydrocarbons is is an asset. And the great thing about nuclear power is you can refine that stuff basically forever. And then you stick it in a container, you fill it with sand, you stick it down on the ground, it turns the sand to glass. And the decay rate of the glass and the sand, decay rate of the glass and the remaining energy is so long that it doesn't make any difference because it won't pollute. So it's not like we haven't solved this problem.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like what is it? Hartford, Washington, they have a nuclear waste storage site, right? The way I kind of think about it is with nuclear waste, yes, it's toxic and everything, but it's very concentrated
Yeah,
because that
it's not
stuff
like
is it's you don't need a lot of it volume wise and it weighs a lot. You just find a place where there's stable bedrock and you basically dig a hole and bury the damn thing.
yeah. And and the point is that you know that that the only reason that people worry about is get into the water. But the flip
Hmm.
side is if you go to Chernobyl today, the the life is just fine.
Hmm.
In other words,
I mean,
so
forget about Chernobyl. Didn't we? Was it the device called, what was it called, Mike, the first fusion bomb, and that essentially
yeah,
created a crater like a mile across in Bikini Atoll, and then the marine life has come back.
yeah,
I think the marine life came back like after 10 years or something.
yeah. It doesn't. It's not the. I mean, during the '70s. I mean, I grew up during this Cold War shit, right? I mean, hiding under your desk
Hmm.
and the sounds, the sirens, and all this junk, right? But it was a lot of hype and fear when the reality is that um, the planet recovers just fine. Um,
Like, here's the part I like to say. And again, my wife and I have this argument all the time. She's afraid of radiation. I keep on asking, well, what kind of radiation are you talking about? Like EM radiation, alpha radiation, beta, gamma, and then of course she, I just won't tell you why. I mean, I was
I
talking
had
to a,
massive doses of radiate therapeutic radiation in my life against cancer, right?
I
Scared the
talked to uh, a friend of mine who's an Army EOD about this, like seriously, asking experts about the NBC problem, right?
Mhm.
Like nuclear, I don't want to brush it off as just like it's nothing, but nuclear, especially from perspective of fallout,
Mhm.
as long as you don't want any of that stuff inside you.
That's
If
right.
the stuff gets inside you, especially the alpha emitting decay, which can knock ionize and knock DNA out of sequence or whatever,
Mhm.
as long as you avoid that, you are relatively safe after the nuclear blast or whatnot.
Mhm.
You just got to wash it off. I mean, do decontaminate and all that.
Mhm.
But some of this chemical stuff that you talk about, shit, that's
So that's
that stuff
horrible.
is really bad. You get a drop on you, you basically die.
Ah, yeah, that's horrible. All right, let's get done.
All right. Question 6 from Mike. What are the differences between the right and left when it comes to political organization and activism? And why is the left more effective at it?
So the difference is that the right has principles that they don't cross even where their enemies are concerned, and this is a mistake. The left has no such concerns. But the main reason left is more effective is that it has full institutional support in every sense of the word, whereas right wing was essentially outlawed after the Second World War within the domains of the global American empire.
Okay, that's the answer. Um, is that I would add one more thing is that because they have no limits on what's acceptable behavior, they can easily ally in groups toward an end. Whereas because those limits are different between conservative factions, it's harder for them to form alliances. The third is that because it's harder to form alliances, it's harder to form trust, and it's even harder to form trust because conservatives tend toward disagreeable, whereas progressives tend toward agreeableness. So there's conformity versus none. So it's much harder to uh, organize the right verbally. It is only organized the right under physical stressors, where it's easy to organize the left with verbally, but it's harder to organize them under physical stressors like violence.
Yeah,
Uh,
the left has ultimately just one uniting goal. They're against us.
right. Um, so uh, this ties into something I have seen as my friend Rudyard has put out. Uh, and don't need to be a long answer. Um, I could just see the comment here for the first time.
Wait,
Um,
which one about
this is
what
from
if Alpheus put out?
Levi Carvalho. And don't need to be a long answer. I don't know who
The
that must be.
question about
That's the number 8. Um. Anyway, sorry, that just threw me. And so that the uh, the left is much easier to organize and the right is much harder. However, once the right organized, it's very powerful. What I've seen in the whereas the left is incremental, like it uses incremental activities, the right uses very binary.
I know. There's a there is a thin, almost, well, there's a thin line, but this
Hmm.
line is it requires a very high bar to exceed the potential for this line. But once you
Yeah,
exceed, it's like a chemical reaction, right? Like when it was
yeah.
catalyst, like it goes really, you need a lot of energy to get over there. But once you're over that threshold, then it's just explosion.
There's explosion. So, um,
everything about the regime is organized around that not happening.
correct.
Yeah.
Now, my friend Rudyard just put out 3 videos on at least 3 on the coming Civil War. And I have seen 3 videos recently by more that not by not conservative people explaining how the right won't win. And it's amazing how Rudyard's has
How the
facts
right will or will not win.
won't how
Uh,
so Rudyard said the right will win. I don't know anybody who thinks the right won't win. I mean, no intellectual thinks the right won't win. But what's fascinating to me is there's no substance to the left's arguments, while there's substance to Rudyard's arguments. And I know that the reason I've been in trouble with the FBI is because I wrote how to do it. I'm not I'm not special. Linda talks about this regularly, um, and certainly special forces guys know how to do it. Our guys are 4-0, zero wins and four
Hmm.
losses against this kind of stuff. And you forget that there's like, even the number of conservatives that would take up their arms. I mean, it's it's in the many millions. How many total people are there in the armed forces? There's 200,000 that can be deployed, right? And that would mean gutting our overseas presence as well. That's why the Obama administration worked so hard to arm all the federal employees, is in preparation for this, because Obama worked with the people at the what is it called, SPLC, or yeah, SPLC, and what's the other Jewish organization, ADL, because we saw the drawing through the doorway, through the window, of when the tip over point would happen. And so they've been planning for this, like Martin says, for forever. The difference is you don't need many people to have a civil war, especially when what your target is energy, telecom, and transport. It's not the government, right? You don't have to. If first responders will stop responding. So I mean, I don't want to get into this because I promised them I wouldn't incite anything, but um, uh, I think the chance of civil war is very, 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 very high, and I think that it has a very unpredictable outcome. When they made a very severe message by clamping down on the January 6th guys, but the January 6th guys weren't armed. They weren't even. They weren't
Just
even.
like, the way I look at it is just a like bunch of American boys showed up in Capitol and had a good time, was beer or whatever. That's not
Also,
an
after
insurrection.
being after being basically allowed in.
Yeah, basically.
I'll kick myself. I don't know. I mean, in retrospect, I was all set to go. I had the speech prepared to give on the the House floor. I had everything ready, and I just was like, I just don't believe this isn't going to be a clusterfuck. And I think, well, if I'd have gone there and read that, somebody had videoed it, it would have been a very different thing. But they took this stupid thing and they cast it like some fucking bloody rebellion, when it's the left that's bombed the White House and the Congress, right? And it's the left that's done all this stuff. The right's trying to restore order, not end it.
Yeah, but the left is the regime.
I know.
Yeah, well, they've
So
taken over the regime.
that's the difference. To answer Mike, that's the difference, is that it's just very hard to get conservatives who are responsible to show up or to do meaningful things, and it's very easy for the left to get up to do their destructive things. Next.
Well, before we move to the next question, I just want to add that I, the question of if a civil war kicks off, which side is going to win, I think, to almost, in my opinion, is almost the wrong question. The question is how do you, well, one, how to define winning, and
Yeah.
also two, despite watching everything that What If Altius and all these people have to put out, I just want to exercise caution that if and when this kicks off, it's probably not going to be a clean cut and easy
No.
win as we think about. It,
No.
in fact, it may drag on for decades
More like the Syrian
because
civil
the
war.
because the definition of winning is much less clear.
Well, that's what I mean. I guess made a mistake here. So, and you're correcting it, which is that our goal has been to create confidence in the severity. In other words, to create confidence in the probability of it, and in how it would uh, be performed, not in the outcome. So that the reason we're proposing our work is to prevent, is to create, is in other words, we want people to believe it so they pay attention to our
Right.
solution. And so our solution should solve this problem for almost everybody at the expense of the academy, the financial sector, and some aspects of the bureaucracy. Right? That's what we believe will happen. So we're trying to solve the problem.
We don't want us to descend into civil war. We're trying
No,
to
we
solve
don't
this
want
problem.
a civil war. We want a solution to civil war. And so we're trying. We it may be we may be it may be a futile effort, but it's not an immoral one. All right, we're certainly going to try to make it happen. And so far, there's nobody on any side that has anywhere near the effort or solutions that we do.
I just,
Well, the
whether it's a left or a right talking about civil war, I just don't think they really have a, I shouldn't say this. I just don't think that they have a clue of what that really means. Like the war tend to happen when both sides think that they can easily win. And just look at World War One, right?
Yeah,
Then it have untold amount of suffering. I doubt we're going to get into a World War One type of situation, but instead it may be worse. It may drag on. I mean, think about it, low intensity conflict dragging on for 3 decades, bombings every day, right? Do you want that kind of stuff on your hands? Probably not.
I can see that happening really easily though, because it's going to be a house to house war. It's not going to be
Right?
like this. It's going to be more like the Syrians.
There's not going to be lines. There's hardly going to be any sides,
Right.
and you're going to have people changing sides, like the our side changing side multiple times or whatever, going for 30 years until a whole generation has been bled dry and everybody gets tired.
Hmm.
the idea is that this is a lesser evil than regime continuing the way it does.
Yeah.
Probably, but my concern is what's the outcome at the end of all this? What regime is going to replace it with? When the whole generation has been bled dry for 30 years, everybody gets tired. They're probably going to vote in for some kind of ultra authoritarian regime just to restore order, and that's actually a bad outcome.
Hmm.
Is it?
Well, as opposed to a liberal democracy, yeah, maybe it's a little better. I don't know.
All right. Next question.
Okay. Question 7. Martin Kurt. The general trend among Europeans is that they are leaving Christianity behind. Europe being further along this process than America. Can you discuss why this is? Seems that most people can see that people are not participating, but I haven't seen an honest discussion as to why.
Different people have different reasons. People who have been among the most zealous Christians in the past have switched to the current state religion of hating whites, while normal people find the move of many churches to the left distasteful. Still, other people were never into the whole religion aspect of it, but it provided them with community, and that hardly exists there today as well. Eastern Europe went through a similar process with communists suppressing Christianity.
So, Martin's right here as usual. Um, you mean they are leaving? So, Martin Kurt, we don't know who's asking this. The general trend among Europeans is they're leaving Christianity behind. Can you discuss why it is? Yeah, it's really simple. Um, it is no longer possible in the present era for people to suspend the disbelief necessary to believe.
Well,
And
I don't think that's true
hold on.
because they believe ridiculous
No,
pseudoscientific
no, no.
nonsense.
I said in Christianity. Right. That's what I said. You're saying that there's a new religion. I'm not disagreeing with you. Right. I'm saying is that religion is the Christian religion. And so I said there's no longer possible. Why? Um, because two things are required for you to become a religious, uh, uh, become deeply religious. One is that you need to be biased toward empathizing fairly heavily instead of sympathizing. In other words, you need to be biased for feels versus reals. That's only a small person. That's not a majority of the population. Most people are somewhere between balanced, are somewhere between balanced and toward the systemizing side. The people that are empathizing are not sufficiently empathizing for the next reason. The next reason is you have to be indoctrinated into religion. If you Some people are called to it or because they have this emotional need, but in general, people have to be indoctrinated. If you take away the indoctrination, the percentage of the people that's desirous of having this suspension of disbelief in order to satisfy the emotional needs is around 20%, maybe less. So we are seeing people gravitate to the limits of the tolerance for the Christian religion. What we are really seeing is the search for a new religion. I thought that when I first heard somebody like Peterson, and I was hopeful of it, that Stoicism would emerge as the optimum religion and restoring the which is sort of like a relationship between humanism, secular humanism, and Stoicism. I thought that would emerge as the logical trajectory, but that would only occur if the society was stable enough to make that transmission. What I believe is happening is I think it's obvious, is society's unstable enough. So they're not going to search for something that's constructive. They're going to search for something that's ameliorative. And I think that's going to be weird religions like Marxism and anti-white colonialism and anti-manism and the entire leftist set of cults, which are all anti-civilization because they're all anti-responsibility, whereas all positive religions and Western religions are pro-responsibility. And so people are evading responsibility because they're not homogenous enough, and they're not how do you say it? They don't have enough trust and care about each other, and so they're seeking for irresponsible religions.
You
So
know, I think people would always seek to evade responsibility if you give them the option.
they will, as long as they will if there's any chance of maintaining status. But so you have to, the question is, can you maintain that when there's, will you do that if there's status attached to responsibility? And that means that responsibility has to be possible, and that responsibility is only going to be possible in a small, ethnically homogenous polity. It's just that's the only way it's possible. So
Uh, it's directly suppressed today. It's like
I agree with you. I'm
disorder.
trying to state the science, and you're trying to state the problem. I'm agreeing with your stating the problem. I'm saying this: if you want it to work, this is what has to happen. The fact that it's actively suppressed today, again, is because my view. Martin's right about democratic, liberal democracy, and I'm right about the feminine and the Jewish. And the males would never let this happen if it weren't for the introduction of women into the polity and Jewish left-wing thinking into the academy. I mean, that's my understanding, because women are the people that are vulnerable to because they desire evasion of responsibility for the commons, where men as obtain their status by seeking responsibility for the commons. In other words, that's secondly why we're not being able to mate, is because men are prohibited from seeking responsibility for commons as a means of demonstrating fitness for which women would pursue them. And so you're having a collapse of mating and reproduction in addition. I mean, the whole Abrahamic sequence that drives us to the feminine, it's just suicidal. It's absolutely suicidal. The pathological feminine is suicidal, and that's what we're living in. We're living in a world of the pathological feminine. That's all I have to say about that one. So you're not going to let me put it this way: Christianity's not going to recover. Sorry, get over it. Right? It's going to be a small minority supernatural religion that's going to fail. Is Christian ethic going to survive? Absolutely. It's endemic in our civilization, and I don't think it's extractable, because it's at this point it's metaphysical. But is the religion necessary to persist the Christian? No, it's not the Christian ethics, not at all. Christian ethics is now metaphysically incorporated into this society. I don't think that's it. Can it be destroyed? Yeah. Well, I mean, some degree, the Marxist left is a virus that takes advantage of the Christian tolerances. All right, we got time here for number 8. Yes.
Yeah. So number 8 from Levi. Can Kurt deliberate more about his idea that a single unmarried man causes revolution? Don't need to be a long answer.
Well, not a question for me. They have nothing to lose and everything to gain. It's a call to adventure. But with low testosterone, video games, porn, and weed available everywhere, I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah, that's the real problem. Is that modernity has found a way to satisfy the emotional needs of men without political action. In other words, men can withdraw very easily. It's not quite. It's they can still do jobs and make income and with low testosterone, video games, porn, weed, and MSG saturated high fat foods. Sure, um, uh, so they can become docile. Um, but that doesn't mean all of them will be. That may be enough men are still mature adults living in the real world that they can bring about a revolution. Even such, those men that have checked out of society, it doesn't checks out of it doesn't mean they won't exert some pressure some other way. So the reason, I mean, I'm this my it's not my idea that single unmarried men cause revolutions. It's a general observation on every major historian is that in order to bring about a revolution and internally or an war of expansion, you need a surplus of males. And surplus of unmarried males generally creates a problem of surplus of unmarried males. I mean, you got to think about it. Marriage is how you get your own tribe, right? It's the smallest tribe you can have, but you're the man, the woman, and your offspring. That's your tribe, right? And if a man has a tribe, he's basically got some purpose. But if he doesn't have a purpose, he's going to seek one. Then one might be self-destructive, but another might be other destructive, because men express their frustration, which means antisocial behavior, by aggression.
Rudyard just had a video about this and it got pulled from YouTube, apparently.
Say this again?
Rudyard just made a video about it and it got pulled from YouTube.
It pissed him off, by the way, big.
Wait, what? What pissed him off?
He put out this the coming incel revolution.
Right.
The video, and it was only released yesterday, the day before.
Right.
And YouTube pulled it.
Oh, they pulled it? Okay, I'm glad I watched it.
It was great. I loved it. I love it because he does something I admire greatly. He's just very real, and and he gives his own impression, and he talks about how hard it is to talk about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so yeah, he got it taken down. All right. He's going to take a little break from Twitter or from social media for a while, and I think that's part of the reason. I'll talk to him this week and find out what's going on. Okay, next.
All right, question number 9. Levi, what does the dissident right has to gain by denying the out of Africa theory about the origin of Homo sapiens? Isn't it a measure about how the right can assume truth over face behavior? How much can pseudo-scientific behavior undermine us?
It's a reflexive denial of everything mainstream, especially anything that's politically used. Because leftist ideologues invoke the theory to claim we're all the same and thus we all need quintillion Africans in our countries. Response is to deny the premise of that claim. Of course, you don't need to do that because the implication doesn't follow. And you can likewise respond like James Santaganatta that we didn't do anything wrong in African colonization. We were just coming back home.
James, God, I tease you about being a hardliner, but James is even worse than you. I used to talk to James every, pretty much every day, uh, prior to that sort of breakup between him and Bill. I miss talking to him sometimes. Um, uh, so yeah, you're actually, of course, this is very insightful. Um, I just like to say that it's, the truth is there, especially before the um, Mediterranean flooded and the Persian Gulf flooded, right? Especially before the Persian Gulf flooded, before that, actually, and before that, before the Mediterranean flooded, there was a lot of gene transfer going on. Even after uh, the Mediterranean flooded, there was still gene transfer going on out through across the Bar el Mandeb, or whatever that's called, strait, because that was relatively dry, and across the uh, Persian Gulf because that was relatively dry. You know, the flooding of the Black Sea, the Persian Gulf. These flood myths are in our histories, right? They're still alive in our memory. Um, And so there's always been back and forth gene flow, and you can see this in the East African populations today. Um, that there's a gene flow, just as you can see the outward gene flow into the Arab populations. As just so gene flow is the norm throughout history. But to say that the old Africans, which we see in the what's their name? The old. I keep wanting to say Han, and I'm like, no, that's China.
The
I can't.
San?
Sorry,
The
the Han.
San? The
Thank you. Thank you.
Khoisan people or
Yes,
something?
yes, the Khoisan people. So they're example of the remaining old Africans, right? And so those people came out, and you can see their legacy in parts of Southeast Asia, and certainly in Australasia. You can see them. You can also, but that's one of the early groups that come out. But you can also see the Rift Valley River, East Rift Valley Africans were the majority influence that went out across the Bar el Mandeb into. I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can somebody look that up for me? Is it Bar el Mandeb Strait? Pronouncing it correctly. Um, and so at the time, that place between East Africa, the ability to walk across the Red Sea, the ability to uh, populate the southern shore area of of the Arabian Peninsula, that was green. Desertification was not there yet. And then the one of the best places to live in human history, just like being around the Black Sea, was the dry Persian Gulf before it flooded, because just as it was better up north in the Tigris or Euphrates river valleys, the whole area was saturated with rivers, and we can still see them underneath it. And we're not going to know about the origins of human civilization until we can fully explore the bottom of the Persian Gulf, because that's where really things started off, was there. And then you basically go around the corner to the Indus River, and that's why there's some goofy linguistic relationship between the Sumerians and the Indo and the Indus River Valley, is because they were clearly in contact. And you can see this path of migration along the coastal areas, because fishing is really easy to stay alive with, compared to going into the interior. As long as you're on the interior near a river, you got fresh water, and you have the fish, and you have hunting. But as you get further and further away from river valleys in the interior, you've got to rely more on hunting. And when you can rely on hunting, that's best if you have large herds, which are usually on the grassland. So you can see how man spread out really logically and based on his level of technology and his food stuff. So, we have the four speciation events. We have something happens in East Africa, something that happens in what would today would be called the Persian Gulf region. There's a debate how much of it happened in the Persian Gulf versus in the Levant. I look at the territorial capacity and I say it's got to be the Persian Gulf, but God knows, right? It might be, right? That's where, and then you get so now you have the Iranics move up, which is the main population group, and then you have the admixture group, which is the Arabs, and then you have the two generations in India are both out of what's Iranic. They're both the dark colored people and the light colored people are both from the same area, right? Just two generations of them. And so you can see how mankind
Wait,
spreads out.
question: how did the Sino-Tibetan got to settle China and Japan and Korea and so on?
Two waves. It looks like the old. This this is this is only something that's pretty confident recently.
Mhm.
But you have the old people coming up, the first generation old people coming up from the south along the coastal route, and then you have the
From the south on. Oh, you mean like from Vietnam and so on?
right. So that you have the first generation out of Africa come up that way,
Uh-huh.
right? And and that's where you get all these odd ones that are like mixtures of uh, Homo erectus, right? And
Right.
so you get this up, and then, but what it looks like is that they came up through India around across the Tibetans,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where the speciation event happens. Not exactly sure where, but it appears to be there because a lot of Asian adaptation, it's very neotenous, which means stress, and uh, it's very cold weather
Yeah.
adaptive, like
So
right.
the Tibetan plateau will definitely do that for you.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like that's what the evidence looks like. I wouldn't be so.
The thing is, I find that really amazing because like I've been to that part of the world before.
Yes,
It's high altitude. We're talking about
yes,
3,000 meters and above. You have a
yes,
hard time breathe and very cold. But there are
yes,
also there are also some surprisingly because latitude wise is close to the North Meridian. If you get down into the river valleys, you basically get subtropic
yes.
climate. It's a very
But
amazing place.
you've got an Asian morphism is can adapt to both really well.
Hmm.
I mean, morphology is very effective at both cold and. Uh, I mean, there's a reason Europeans and East Asians have these massive fucking heads, right? I mean, the cold is really good for that. But then body weight and body size. I mean, there's a reason Africans are slower. It's because slower metabolically is because they just need to survive in the freaking heat.
Hmm.
It's the reason they mature faster is because they have to handle the disease gradient. Well, if you're in the freaking freezing world all the time, your basic problems are: can we get along? Because otherwise we'll starve, and there's no disease gradient, right? So the basic problems that have happened in the cold weather is the spread of the things that live on our animals, rather than
Hmm.
the stuff, uh, the domesticated animals, rather than the stuff in Africa,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
fucking
Everything
everything.
else that's trying to kill you.
Everything's trying to kill you all the time. So, um, so what was the question again? I want to make sure it is. So, the out of Africa theory is, you know, the the statement that there's gene flow is not different from the full, what they call the full package, which happened somewhere between 100,000 and 75,000 years ago. what they call the full package, which is when we had technology, social, we had fishing nets, we had uh, pointed stuff, we had boats, we had the social order, right? When we had our hands, we had language. That seems to have collected in East Africa there, and then we had waves coming out of it, and some waves went back and forth. So I mean, there was obvious reasons for that. So some gene flow. But in general, the theory is right. What matters is the four speciation events. The one in East Africa, the one in the dry Persian Gulf, the one in the Tibetan Plateau, and the one in Europe. I mean, in the Europeans are new, a relatively new race, so to speak, because not very many Europeans survived the in any one place along the glacial lines, right? The
Mm.
snow. And so you had people in Spain, people in Italy, people in Greece, and then you had these populations along all the way over to the Urals. So, and then you had the ancestral North Eurasians in the very north, who ran into the expansion of the East Asians, which was counterclockwise, and they had so the Finns have some East Asian in them, right? And that's why we say they're serious. We said it because they're East Asian. They have some East Asian. Just to be
Levi posted a question and said, "Hey Kurt, is it true that the first Homo sapiens in Africa were not black-skinned?"
The question is the term Homo sapiens. Um, uh, to put it this way, all great apes, like most mammals, have white skin, right? Black skin is an adaptation to the loss of hair,
Hmm.
right? Um, there's interesting balance between some fetal, not only vitamin D, but some fetal development uh, biochemistry that requires. I'm forgetting which chemical it is over, but there's some interesting conflict there, and that if you have to have um, you can't have too much sun or you can't do it. Can't have enough sun, you can't do it. And the same thing with vitamin D is you need enough, right? And so, and then the second part is neotenically, is that humans prefer childlike appearances, which would convey fertility, and light color is basically a sign of youth and fertility. So these three selection processes worked together to first produce dark skin in order to lose hair. We remember that the reason we're so successful is we're bipedal and can engage in persistence running because we can breathe at the same time as we're running. So we can run down anything on Earth. Um, and so in order to do that, we needed to dissipate our heat, which was lose the fur. And the second thing we needed to do was convert our digestion from being complex, like the the apes, especially gorillas and orangutans, and less so, more like chimpanzees, who don't have those enormous bellies, and then to us, who's the furthest along, where if you're a meat eater, you can put in dense food and digest it, and not carry around this a massive digestive system all the time. And so that combination of eating meat, shrinking digestion, developing, converting it to legs and running and losing hair, and then that leads to having your hands free, which probably leads to bigger brains, which leads which leads to speech, which leads to tool making and cooperation. I mean, just think about it. You can walk around with a spear in your hand, right? That's a huge difference,
Hmm.
right? Versus every other animal on the planet. I mean, my dog will carry around his stick, but I mean, he can't. It's less useful than his teeth. Um, so yeah, it's the outer Africa's, and Martin's correct, is that there's this knee-jerk reaction to use pseudoscientific claims or sophistry claims or all sorts of other stuff if some particular argument is used against them. But the fact that we came out of Africa is like, well, the people in Africa might have very likely, because I've seen this before, come out of Southern Europe, right? And there was the original apes that were very likely in Southern Europe, right? And so because the when the Mediterranean was dry. So we
Mhm.
don't. There's lots of gene flow happening all over the place. What matters is when you have the whole toolkit, when you have fully modern humans, and that's somewhere between 175,000 years ago. That's not a long time ago. Look what we did as soon as we got the toolkit. I mean, holy shit! Look what we did in the past. You look and say, what did we do between some 80,000 and 40,000? We covered the planet. What did we do between 40,000 and 10,000 years ago? We killed everything.
Mhm.
What did we do between 10,000? We converted to agrarianism and uh, and um, and animal husbandry. What did we do after that? We created cities and trade. And what do we do after that? We created the capture of energy and the industrial revolution. What do we now? We're creating the informational revolution, and we're on the borderline of making intelligences smarter than we are. I mean, this acceleration curve is pretty
Yeah,
fascinating.
that's the power law distribution because we humans were essentially operating with Metcalfe's law, right?
Yeah,
This network, the benefits of the network is number of nodes squared
yeah,
because we're able to cooperate at that scale.
which matters.
Yeah. All right.
And it's
We're
why
up.
you're going to have markets because markets are the computational system by which networks compute.
Mhm. So we're at the 2 hours mark. Shall we call it today? And once we're done, I just need 5 minutes to talk to you and Martin.
Oh, I won't be available in 2 weeks, so pick whether you want to move it a week forward or back.
Okay.
All right.
Curt, you want to do an outro?
Yep. Hi, this is Curt Doolittle, Francis Sue, Martin Steffen for Natural Law Institute. This has been our office hours Q&A for Friday, April 12th, 2024. We covered 9 questions today. Have we done that in a
It's a
while?
record.
That's
I don't
that's
think
like
we've
a
ever done
yeah.
that.
I don't think
That's
we've
like
ever
light
done.
speed.
So anyway, we only have a couple, so
So,
please
so I
go
think
to
that the request out to the audience is please add more questions. We need a
right. We need
longer
more.
queue.
All right. Please leave comments. We enjoy them. Thank you very much, and let's continue the good fight. Bye bye.
And I think given Martin said he won't be available, he won't be available in 2 weeks. I will probably schedule this 3 weeks from now, so it'll be up there.
We've apparently twice managed 12 questions.
Wait,
Have
what?
we really?
Yes.
Wow.